Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Shalom. I'm David Mencer, Israeli Government Spokesman. It's Thursday, the 27th of June, day 265 of the October 7th war. A short update from me and then to your questions. Yesterday, I reminded you about baby Kfir Bibas, more days in captivity than free. Today, I want to remind you that his 4-year-old brother, Ariel Bibas, is also a hostage. Are they being kept together? Look at him, please. Say his name, Ariel Bibas. His grandparents were killed on October 7th. His parents are also hostages. 265 days. Innocent children hostages in the hands of a death cult. We will not rest until all 120 are brought home. We dismantle Hamas's governing and military capability, and we remove the terrorist threat to Israel. Now, sad news of an IDF casualty, 667 since the start of the war. Captain Alon Scagio was just 22 years old from Hadera. He fell fighting terror in Jenin. Since October 7th, our security forces have been conducting intensive counter-terrorism activities in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, to root out terrorism and protect our citizens. Our fallen soldiers are and remain heroes in our heart. We say thank you to these soldiers and to their families for their sacrifice, and we honor what they stood for. May the memories of all of our fallen soldiers be a blessing forever. Next to the IPC report, known as the Hunger Report, it's been widely trailed over much of the media over the last few days. Look, this report is highly misleading. It's biased. It lacks transparency. Transparency reflects only partial data and, of course, does not disclose the names of the organizations who actually wrote it. It's based upon data from Hamas's own health institutions. No reservations. We've shown how unreliable their data is, but despite these inaccuracies, the negative bias, the bottom line is claims regarding starvation, I say that in inverted commas, starvation in Gaza are baseless. They are baseless. So the inaccuracies prove yet again that the dark predictions by the IPC, parroted by much of the news media, were exaggerated and baseless. Their main purpose, of course, was to exert pressure on Israel. Gaza is how it is because of the murderous regime of Hamas. Its cynical use of civilian populations to ensure its own survival, using civilians as human shields, the massive theft of humanitarian aid, the use of hospitals, shelters, and UN facilities for terror. So we say to the United Nations, focus on these vile practices by Hamas, act against them. Only then the food security situation in Gaza will improve even faster than shown in the new IPC report. Now an update from COGAT and their work coordinating aid into Gaza. Over the last 24 hours, 219 aid trucks went into Gaza from Kerem Shalom and Erez, and originating from Egypt, but also from the port of Ashdod and elsewhere in Israel. 6 tankers of fuel and 6 of cooking gas. 15 coordination requests for humanitarian missions were requested. 15 were approved. Only 12 were actually carried out after 3 were cancelled by their organisers. Gate 96 is also open and operational overnight. A convoy of 22 aid trucks and 6 fuel tankers entered via Gate 96. And Israel is, of course, expanding our efforts to facilitate more humanitarian aid into Gaza. And lastly, I want to draw your attention to an event tonight. The Nova community will hold a musical memorial event in Yarkon Park, to which media are invited to in Tel Aviv, between the hours of 5 p.m. tonight and 11 p.m. There will be music and reflections by Nova survivors and also by released hostages. So that's the end of our briefing today. I will now take your questions, which you should put in the chat together with your news outlet. The first question we have is from David Clement, the news forum in Canada. Why was Mujahideen Abadi strapped to the hood of a Jeep? Are those responsible facing consequences? Thank you for that question, David. We've made our position extremely clear on this fact. The IDF has said that those actions, because they are so rare, have actually, I think, made news. The IDF considers itself, and they are our sons and daughters, and of course, fighting in this people's army against this terrorist threat. They are the most ethical, the most moral army in the world. And it is for that reason that whenever there are actions taken by our soldiers which are outside the rules of engagement by the IDF, they do stand out. And the IDF has said very, very clearly, you can check the comments for yourself, David, that that action was wrong, and consequences and investigation is taking place into what precisely happened. And the necessary disciplinary action will follow, of course, in due course, as it always does. Next question is from Joel Pollack at Breitbart News. A Harvard report on anti-Semitism released this week found pervasive prejudice against pro-Israel students in general and against Israelis in particular. Will Israel be responding to the report? Thank you for that question, Joel. I haven't seen that report, and I'm not aware of that particular Harvard report. But we will take a look at it once we see it and decide how to take it forward from there. Anti-Semitism is, of course, a scourge in all societies. It's the world's oldest hatred. It has been a massive spike of hatred towards Jewish communities the world over. One only has to look at the pogrom, and it was a pogrom in Los Angeles, and other such terrible acts. Look, the media have a very, very important role to play here, because there has been reporting of this conflict, which very often unquestionably uses Hamas statistics. The famous example is the hospital, the Al-Ali hospital, which so many media, BBC, CNN, and others, accused of being bombed by Israel with hundreds and hundreds of casualties. Of course, it was bombed by an Islamic Jihad stray rocket being fired at Israel, falling short. Those erroneous news reports, those news reports without context, giving false accounts of casualty figures, always talking about, just using Hamas statistics. It's important for all of us to understand that that sort of sloppy journalism leads to hatred, which leads to attacks on Jews. We need to be absolutely clear about this fact. Sloppy journalism leads to hatred, leads to attacks on our people. 12-year-old girls in France raped. School children in Montreal, Jewish school children, fired upon. And other terrible attacks against Jewish communities. The media have an extremely important responsibility to honestly report what is going on with context, and not simply parroting the effects, the Hamas, whatever Hamas put out. We are very, I want to share with you that Israel has taken on this terrorist genocidal force, and we know that the casualty figures are lower than 1-to-1, one Hamas terrorist to one civilian. I would remind you that the UN average is 8 or 9 civilians to a combatant, but ours is one Hamas terrorist to one civilian, probably lower than that now. So even though we have been faced with this genocidal army, not a war that we chose or the war that we wanted, this genocidal army which attacked us, and for which there was no other response than to destroy this Hamas terrorist army. When we have destroyed them, when we are going about our role of destroying them, we are, of course, criticized through sloppy journalism, through repeating Hamas figures, through unquestionably taking incorrect sources. And that sloppy journalism leads to hatred, leads to attacks on Jews. We need to be absolutely clear about that fact. I don't say that there is a, we don't say here that there is an agreement between Hamas and news organizations. But what we do say is Hamas rely on journalists and news organizations repeating their lies. They know what will happen. They know that erroneous reports of civilian casualties, all, of course, Hamas never talk about their own terrorist casualties. Erroneous report of civilian casualties will make the news, it will create hatred, and it will create outrage against Israel and attacks on Jews. So the media need to be very aware of that fact. So next question from David Isaac at the JNS. John Kirby yesterday blamed criminal gangs for holding up aid on the Gazan side. For months, the US has been holding Israel responsible, calling on Israel to allow more aid in. So does the PMO think this represents a shift in US thinking, more in line with what Israel has been saying? Thank you for that question, David. Look, every day in these briefings, since the start of the war, we have talked about the amount of aid which has been going on. And we have made the points very, very clear that the issue has never been about aid going in. We're getting as much aid as we can in, and we're always trying to expand our efforts. I talked about Gate 96 today. We're always trying to get more and more aid in. 37,500 trucks that have gone in, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of tons of aid which is going in. The issue is not about aid going in. The issue is about distribution, about these criminal gangs, and many of them Hamas terrorists who are now without commands, or maybe sometimes with Hamas commanders. We know that they are causing the misery. Where there is hunger in Gaza, we know that it's hunger caused, orchestrated by Hamas. So we'll always try to ensure that Hamas is our target and not ordinary Gazans. We want food and supplies and medical supplies as much as possible to go into Gaza to feed ordinary Gazans and not the terrorists. But it is, of course, a very important issue, this issue of looting. And we know that it's down to the hapless United Nations, UNRWA, who work hand in hand with Hamas, who have been so hapless and so useless in distributing the aid. I made my points very clear yesterday about the need for the UN to really pull their finger out and do a much better job. They have sadly failed the people of Gaza in the most appalling way. Next question is also from David Isaac. The US is still saying it will work with the UN, this despite Israel pointing out UN agencies' incompetence. Would you comment, would Israel like to see the US cease working with UN bodies regarding Gaza? Look, I will talk, thank you for that question, David. I will talk in particular about UNRWA and the World Food Programme. We made our points extremely clear yesterday about our views on those organisations. UN organisations need to be much more efficient. They have sadly failed Gazans. They seem much more willing to perpetuate this conflict and make political points to pressurize Israel. There seems to be a report almost every day talking about famine and starvation and often using this word extermination. You know, we as Jewish people having the word extermination used against us. So we've made our points extremely clearly about aid agencies and their inefficiency inside Gaza. Next question from Joel Pollock. A further question. Hamas leader Khaled Mashal told Sky News today that Gaza is destroyed, but this is part of the march of our people towards liberation. Could you respond? Thank you for that question, Joel. The IDF has released evidence today that far from the usual narrative which is put out so widely about the majority of properties in Gaza being destroyed, the IDF statistics show that 17%, only 17% of structures have been destroyed in Gaza, not the much higher figures which have been quoted by other organizations, Hamas, of course, which controls pretty much every piece of news which comes out of Gaza. And that's a very, very important point. As to Khaled Mashal's willingness to sacrifice his own people for their so-called march towards liberation. Look, I think it's extremely important for people that wish to see a better future for Gazans and Israelis is that we engage in activity which brings people together towards a better future rather than this idea of liberation. I mean, this sort of talk echoed by UNRWA in UNRWA schools, this idea of liberation. There is not going to be any liberation. The only liberation which there is liberating Gaza from Hamas. Next question is from Jim Williams. Yesterday at the State Department briefing, Matt Miller said that commercial trucks with food supplies are going into Gaza without issues, while the aid trucks for the UN distribution stand idle, and he stressed that UN needs to do better. Do you agree with that statement? Yes, of course, Jim. Thank you very much for that question. I too watched that media briefing with Matt Miller yesterday at the State Department. It is true that the UN needs to do a lot better. We describe them as hapless and hopelessly inefficient. They can always change their actions by focusing on feeding Gazans rather than lambasting Israel. They seem to be much better at lambasting Israel than actually feeding Gazans. On that point, I wanted to share another issue which came up in that press conference yesterday with Matt Miller. There was a lot of skepticism from journalists regarding the MSF, the Médecins Sans Frontières physical therapist that was killed by the IDF, who was actually an Islamic Jihad terrorist. I heard a lot of skepticism about this from the journalists. Look, he was a physical therapist by day, but also a terrorist by night. So that skepticism in that press conference yesterday was wholly misguided. He wasn't a doctor, he was a physical therapist. If you look at the IDF Twitter account, you'll see pictures of him in Islamic Jihad uniform. The IDF actually today released more information about this case. Look, this Médecins Sans Frontières employee, Fadi Al-Wadia, working as a physical therapist, but also for Doctors Without Borders, he was a prominent Islamic Jihad terrorist. He developed and advanced their rocket array for 15 years as a central figure in the organization. He had knowledge of electronics and chemistry. And the very same year that he joined MSF, he tried to leave Gaza to go to Iran together with two other terrorists in order to engage in terrorist training there. So I hope that clears it up. This sort of instinctive, I would call it, instinctive cynicism against anything that Israel says. Journalists yesterday calling here this man, he was a doctor. How on earth could he be a terrorist as well? Look, we the Jewish people recognize evil when we see it. Can I remind you of Dr. Mengele in Auschwitz? He was also a trained doctor. Being a doctor, sadly, does not exclude you from evil acts. Can I talk about other doctors in history that have performed terrible acts? This guy wasn't a doctor, he was a physical therapist, but it was just a ruse, it was a cover-up for his Islamic Jihad work, terrorist work. There we go. Any other questions? No, that was the last question. So with that, I'll say thank you for joining us here today. The next briefing will be on Monday. But in the meantime, please do stay safe, and thank you for joining us. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching. Drop a comment below. Don't forget to like, share, and hit subscribe to stay updated with our latest content. Until next time, stay informed and inspired. This is Dejobnik signing off.